for doing this. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with us, even, these days a little bit hard because a lot of vacations are starting today, especially in the Orthodox world. So it's a great pleasure to welcome with us Professor Kashtan Nadav, a professor in the Western Galilee College in Israel. He's going to talk to us. He's going to give a talk about the Mediterranean as a platform for intercultural connections, past and present. And you know that the Impact Project is like, this is the main purpose, in order to cultivate the interculturalism among us and among our students. Few words about Professor Nadav, that he speaks Greek perfectly, but I will speak in English because I think my English is better than my Greek. He's a maritime historian specializing in ancient Mediterranean cultures of the Greco-Roman world. Thank you very much, Nadav, that you spend your time with us, during your most productive years. He holds a bachelor and a master's degrees in general history at the University of Haifa. He received his PhD from the prestigious Sorbonne in Paris, in France. In 1999, he was nominated director of National Maritime Museum in Haifa, Israel. In 2009 to 10, was called to establish a Department of Conservation Studies at Western Galilee College, where he served as a director until 2021. Nadav has a lot of distinctions, and among them, he is a member of International Congress of Museums, the Israeli Committee for UNESCO, and the Council for Preservation of Sites and Monuments in Israel. Nadav, ευχαριστώ πολύ για τη συμμετοχή σου, and we are looking forward to listening to you. Please place your transparencies to full screen.
Okay, let's do it again. Just a minute. Where is it now?
Probably stop sharing and share it again. Probably.
Yeah, I'll do it again. Yes. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Nadav, we can see it, but do you want to enlarge it?
Yes,
Okay.
so I have to make a new share, I think.
Yeah, a new share.
Let's see, I think this one.
Yeah, and
that's okay. That's okay now?
Yeah,
yes.
Excellent.
Okay. So just give me a sign, I will start.
Start, please.
Okay. So hello, everybody. Thank you, Costa, and all your team for inviting me for to speak about a topic which is close to my heart and to my life, mainly professional life, the Mediterranean, on different angles. And today I will devote my lecture, my speech, to several aspects of the Mediterranean as a platform for intercultural connections. We can say intercultural and interdiscipline. We use it a lot nowadays in order to create projects, especially the one you are involved in. But the Mediterranean, I would try to show, has been by destiny a space for the meeting, exchange between different cultures. It's not only East and West or West and East. And I will show it via different themes. So I'll start with terminology. As we do in classical studies, we will see the names which most of them and the connotations of the names of the Mediterranean, which is the modern name used in several languages. Then I will speak at different levels of 3 or 4 spheres of connectivity. I will center on ancient times and sometimes allude to modern times. I decided to leave out the modern aspects of the Mediterranean. I will show a map at the end because it's too large for such an intervention, and we can complete it if we decide it's appropriate. So I start with colonization. Nowadays we speak of colonization still. There are even still colonies like Gibraltar, which is at the edge of the Mediterranean, which is the end of post-colonialism. But it started in a different way. I will speak about trading and exchange of products, which is the basis of sometimes the basis or one stage, one phase in interconnectivity. And of course, it means shipping, it means seafaring. I will show just shortly the example of obsidian, where it was found. I will speak then about the religious and spiritual sphere of the Mediterranean, especially I will point at the voyage of Paulus, who actually propagated Christianity during his 4 trips across the Mediterranean. And it's an important phase in the history of Christianity, but also of the general Mediterranean. And finally, I will mention at times the cultural model, which is the one we are all interested in, how cultures actually interchange, influence each other by the way of language, by the way of cult and other spheres. And from there, I will go to the conclusion and try to show, while citing one of the great historians, how, in what way the Mediterranean space is a connecting or a separating space, which is, of course, a sort of a contradictory question. So let us start. Terminology. I will start with Greek. The word for sea, there are many words in Greek, in ancient Greek and modern Greek for sea, but the most used one is the thalassa. And when you speak of the Mediterranean, megali thalassa. That means the Great Sea, and we will see it repeated in other languages, including Hebrew. Nowadays, you say mesogios, which actually has the meaning of Mediterranean, something that interconnects, that is the mediator, like in the word Mediterranean. So this is in modern Greek. In Hebrew, we have two names for the Mediterranean. One is Hayam Hagadol or Hayam Hagadol, which means literally the Great Sea, and the other is like Mesogios and the Mediterranean, Hayam Tichon, which means it is in the middle between extremities. Now, interesting enough, the connotation of big, megalo, in Greek, or magnum, we will soon see, it could mean just physically the size of the Mediterranean, but then only in relation to our small lakes. That means ancient people of the Mediterranean, when they looked at the sea, saw it as a big space. And this will escort us during this lecture. So gadol in Hebrew, big, can have, you call also God big, yes, gadol. It can have a threatening connotation, a bit frightening. In Arabic, el-Bahr el-Abyad, I asked one of my students to tell me if he knows why the Mediterranean in Arab culture is called the white, el-Bahr el-Abyad. And it can be as simple as the foam, of course, like Aphrodite, or the shores, the sandy shores of Africa looked upon from the ships, and nowadays from the sky and the satellite. But at least the Mediterranean, also in Arabic, has an adjective. In Turkish, it is Akdeniz. Good to know, because Turkey is a very important participant of Mediterranean and, in a way, dialectic identity of the Mediterranean. And we passed to Latin, which was, of course, the lingua franca, was the English of its periods for hundreds of years. And there we have again mare magnum, mare internum, which is a vision of the Roman Empire towards the sea as an internal part of the Roman Empire. We will see a map. And the most famous expression is Mare Nostrum, our sea. That was an expression used by Roman empires to show that the Romans, who were continental civilization at the base, became a maritime one and founded their empire around the Mediterranean. Very important as a model for other later empires. So they called it Mare Nostrum, and Italians know well that Mussolini used this term in order to make a foundation of his point of view of the Italian empire in his eyes. So this is Latin. and Mediterraneo, of course, in Italian, and in other languages, Mediterranee, of course, and of course, the Mediterranean in the title of these lectures. So these are the names, and I could enlarge a lot about it, but the names have connotations, and the names touch, and the names unfold many layers of significance. Geographical data, also very basic and quick. We speak about a sea, a big sea, but in a way it's only a small sea, because the surface of the Mediterranean is 1 to 2% of the oceans. The oceans are 70% of the planet. But as a sea, as we center on this sea, its surface is 2.5 million kilometers together. The depth could be, people don't know that the depth of the sea in the area of Crete, in the middle of the Aegean, is 5 kilometers, but it is a shallow sea, especially in its eastern side, where it doesn't arrive at 1.5 kilometers, but it has a lot of meanings for the economic potential of the Mediterranean. Extent of, that's very important for shipping, for connectivity in ancient times. So first of all, the length is about 4,000 kilometers, and the extent north-south, that means how you cross it, at least from north to south, from south to north, is 800 kilometers at the biggest, and much less 100 kilometers between Sicily and Tunisia, and of course the shortest of all is the Gibraltar Strait, which is if you want, the easiest way, as long as you go to Morocco or to Spain, to cross the Mediterranean at its extremity. Okay, coastline, of course, very important. If you want a phenomena to define the maritime identity of a country, you can simply measure its coastline. So in this respect, Israel has only 200 kilometers on the Mediterranean and 100 more on its lakes, but Greece, Turkey, Italy, France have a lot of coastline, and in some 46,000 kilometers of coast, which have to be safeguarded against development. And this is one of the challenges of modern times. Islands, of course, are one of the most important elements to define shipping, to define the identity, to define what is to be maritime. And there are 3,000, but only 200 are really inhabited, most of them in Italy, in Greece, Italy, Turkey, and Croatia, which has quite a lot of islands on its territory. So this was just as a good lesson, yes, to start with geography. Geography can always be a basis for good analysis, cultural analysis of history. And the enclosed sea, you will see at the end of the lecture some titles. The Mediterranean could be considered as an open space when you look at it from one of the coasts of those countries surrounding it. But when you look at the map, at the minute people, and soon we will see ancient maps, could draw maps, you understand that it is enclosed, it is almost trapped. It was designed and described as a frog or a lake, many adjectives. So it shows that people are mostly continental in their approach, in their life, and the sea, we are not speaking of Greeks, Phoenicians, and maritime people, was an outstanding phenomenon. You had to cross it to do some seafaring. And you see the same from satellite images, as I show you here on this image. So the Mediterranean has already a dialectic of a closed and open sea, like many others. I think in oceans, it's much more important, the open side, the challenge to cross an ocean to the horizon. But the Mediterranean, in spite of its 4,000 kilometers of length, is still enclosed between continents. We will see it later in the modern political division of the 23 or 24 countries that surround it. Old maps, ancient maps. The Greeks were amongst the first to draw maps. Maybe others did, but as you know from Greek history and literature, they were always inclined to document. And they started inspecting, yes, the scientific approach of Aristotle and his followers was to look at the world, observe the phenomena, including winds, and draw the world. And this is one of the ancient maps in Latin terminology. The Greeks believed that the ocean, by the god Okeanos, surrounded the earth. There were all kinds of proportionate measures, and that the Mediterranean was really at the center of the cosmos, or actually the oikumene. We shall speak about this word. So the Mediterranean was the center of their world, to which until places where people still lived, and this is how they approached also their journeys. This is the reconstruction of an important word in Greek, in ancient Greek, oikumene. This word went a long journey to become a term of the Christian church, you know, the ecumenical synods and assemblies, but oikumene is simply the inhabited world. The Greeks said, our world goes until the extreme or the distances where people still live, where we know they live, or we can assume they live. Beyond that is beyond the world. And they called this word oikumene from the word oikos, which is the home, the house. And as you see, people, maybe you know, a lesson in geography, the three continents generally shown in cartography were Europe and Asia and Libya, all Greek words. Africa was called Libya. So Libya can be proud of having been actually the term for the entire continent of Africa. And when in the Odyssey, we hear that Odysseus sails, he sails towards Libya, and the wind pushes him south towards Libya. And this term repeated for a long period in Greek and then Roman history. Now winds, we are going to speak about connectivity, but when you have the geographical approach and want to speak about shipping, seafaring, ships sailing as a mean to get from one place to another, you have to take care of the winds. So Aristotle, whom I cited, he wrote a big treatise about ships, about winds, and the Greeks, the ancient Greek, identified dozens of winds. They identified them by simply inspecting them in a scientific way and calling them by names that follow their characters. For instance, a wind that brings corn and comes from Egypt could be a southern wind. So they call it in this way, and etc., etc. It can bring humidity or dryness or all kinds of dust and different parts. And this map of winds, which is a sort of orientation, was developed and became a very important one. In Athens, if you go, you can see the Tower of Winds, which actually gave instructions for sailors. It is now placed just near the Plaka in the old city of Athens. And one of my ex-colleagues, Patrice Pommet, to whom I devote this slide, studied the navigation in the ancient Mediterranean. He was an expert of shipping, and he also reproduced this rosette of winds, showing you how many names it had in Greek then in Latin. Not only the four winds and four directions, but many subdivisions which could permit the Greek sailors, following the Phoenicians who didn't have such a rosette of winds, they could navigate. And this is from the same book, Pommet, who was French teaching in the University of Aix-en-Provence and a good colleague of us in the field of reconstruction of ancient ships. You can see the directions or the prevailing winds in the Mediterranean. So you see, of course, this is quite schematic, as some maps tend to be when they are a sort of overall look. You see very well that the dominant winds are the western ones. And this is why the Greeks called the western wind Zephyros, the pleasant one. And it was the agreeable one because it could push you with the boat when there were no motors from let's say, from Italy to Greece, from Greece to the islands, from the Aegean elsewhere. And other winds were colder and much more dangerous. So the western wind had a good connotation, or the wind coming from the west. Of course, the map is much more complicated than what is seen here in a semantic way, but you could not cross the Mediterranean until recently without taking care of the winds around. So the northern wind, Boreas, is in red here, and the western wind, Zephyros in Greek, is the better one in general, of course. Now, the one responsible for the winds, I'm diverting before I speak about connectivity, because it brings us to religion and to the impact of divinities. So the minister responsible for the sea, nowadays we don't have ministers for the sea, but the Olympian minister was, of course, Poseidon. And Poseidon was, of course, directed by Zeus, the father and the president of the Olympus, but he was in charge of ships, and we know already from the Odyssey that he could put up a storm and calm the sea. These attributes were given also to the Jewish God, to Jesus in the ancient and New Testament, in the Old and New Testament. But Poseidon was a real divinity, not that other cultures in North Europe and in the East did not have sea divinities. Of course they had. And of course, Poseidon had his trident as a symbol of his rule of the sea, and he had Amphitrite, one of his women, following him and riding a chariot with 4 horses, a very well-known motif in Greek ancient art. So this is Mr. Poseidon, who is in charge of the seas, to remind that many cultures of the Mediterranean said that moving at sea, or which permits the connectivity or seafaring and getting into chat with others, is always ruled by the gods in charge, by the forces of nature, and the winds we saw. So this is Poseidon. And Amphitrite and many mosaics describe, of course, Poseidon as the one who can, of course, ride horses or charge horses underwater. Now we go to one of the spheres I'm discussing, travels or connectivity by shipping and seafaring. So we have very ancient stories, well known. They are considered mythical stories about crossing the Mediterranean. Like any myth, I think you will agree, they can be legendary, as I wrote here in the title, but they can also be based on real experiences. I think this is the true way to interpret mythological histories, stories, and navigating. So this is the Odyssey. So the Odyssey, it starts in Asia Minor, in Turkey of our days, in Troy, and crosses many sites in Greece, in Sicily, in North Africa, in Western Italy, and maybe elsewhere. So it is an overall story of navigating created by Homer in the 8th century BC, and it is the first well-known literary piece, which is a basis for the entire Greek and Western literature and civilization. Of course, with some doubts about its veracity. Another famous journey, which could have taken place earlier, is the Argonautica, but I'm just showing it as an overall literary, cultural idea of that you can cross with a ship the Mediterranean, be bound to many dangers of windstorms and other adventures, but you have a mission, and the mission, of course, of the Argonauts who left from Volos, Iolkos, was to go and take the golden geese in the Black Sea. And they encountered many adventures and difficulties, and this was a source, a cultural source, for many maps and drawings of travels at sea. So the Argonautica is number 2 of the legendary Mediterranean crossings or travels. And the third one is a basis of the Roman, of the Italian mythology. That's, of course, the Aeneid, which is a variation on, of course, of the Odyssey. And there, Aeneas, who is the founder of Rome, travels himself from Turkey, from the Eastern Mediterranean via Crete to Italy, and founds in Latium the city of Rome. And he goes also to Carthago and has many adventures. So neighbors are attested, are mentioned, but the theme of crossing the sea and in the way laying the foundations for what we call nowadays interconnectivity or connection between nations were done by these mythological stories. And so these were three legendary tales. Now we go to roots, which cross, of course, not only the sea, they cross many periods. The first considered in the Mediterranean to have developed some sort of roots, there is some anachronism in it. Maybe the Phoenicians simply sailed because they were able to build strong ships, do some cabotage, which means sailing along the shores, and cross the Mediterranean and probably further. So scholars who studied ancient roots attributed to the Phoenicians the three types of roots, where you see here in three colors. One close to the shore, where they also founded their colonies and cities. We will come back to colonization. The middle one, which is the most problematic because their ships are lost, and the northern one, which came from the Levant, from nowadays Lebanon, Israel, and followed Cyprus from the north or south, and then continued to the west, more along the shores. So these are the presumed routes of the Phoenicians who started sailing in the 9th century BC, just before or contemporary to the Odyssey. And very interestingly, in the Odyssey, we hear about meetings between Phoenicians and Greeks, and the Greeks don't attribute a very nice behavior to the Phoenicians. They call them robbers, etc., etc. So this is what they had as a name. So you see how you can develop a prejudice and a common name to entire peoples. That was done already then, of course. The Phoenicians not only sailed across the Mediterranean, they founded very important colonies or settlements along the crucial places like Cyprus, which was inhabited by different people. Islands are actually centers of multicultural remains and of course societies. So Cyprus, Sicily, and then they went to Spain and probably managed at least to cross to the western side of Spain, where they could find metal, and probably to Britain, and some say even across the Atlantic, which is far-fetched. But this old map from the Atlas of Michael Grant at least shows you the extent of the Phoenicians, their endeavor in sailing, founding settlements, which were a model for later civilizations and even for nowadays. So we will see it soon in the journey of Paulus. So these are the Phoenicians. And look at Sicily as an example. Sicily can be described as one of the islands that represent multicultural facets already in ancient time. This map actually reconstructs the different peoples that settled in Sicily, Phoenicians, ancient Greeks, and others, and other local, and this is why the destiny of Sicily for many centuries was a multicultural island, influenced both from the north, from the south, and from the east by the peoples and sailing peoples who came and settled in it. And so this is Sicily, which is a story in itself as a model for multicultural civilizations. And this is the geographical map of Sicily, a dramatic island, an entity in itself. Like many islands, they are Italians, but they are a bit different. The Greeks came and settled big cities in Syracuse, in other places, which now became of course, World Heritage Sites and are full of temples and remains and cultural remains. And Sicily has a history, a modern history in itself, both belonging and not belonging to Italy, like other islands. So this is this example of Sicily. Now, what the Greeks and Phoenicians did, and this is again a model for connectivity and separation, is settling. They sailed, but they didn't sail just for sailing. They sailed, of course, in order to find new markets, new products, to do some trade. And the Greeks, as you see here in red color, sailed around the Aegean Sea, the center and the heart of the Greek culture from its antiquity, and went to the Black Sea. This is why the Argonauts, probably we saw before, developed the myth over there. But they also went to Cyprus, and they also went to southern Italy and to Sicily, which we just saw. And so much so that ancient South Italy was called Magna Graecia, the great Greece, because they transferred by shipping and exchanging product and settling, they transferred the Greek civilization into southern Italy, to Sicily. They did the same, by the way, in Asia Minor, Turkey of our days. Phocaea, which is mentioned here, and many settlements along western Turkey were actually Greek heritage. And this is why I would call, in a paraphrase, the Greater Italy, the Greater Greece, Magna Graecia, also the areas to the east of Greece. And they went also to, so you see the red color shows an expansionist territorial settlement, which could be political, military, but finally is also cultural. This is the model that serves us for the Mediterranean of nowadays with its nations. Just to show an example of the importance of trade, it's the product, a very important product of no, I missed the word now, of the volcanic glass. And its origin was the island of Milos, where also Venus was found. And the interesting fact is that archaeologists found the same type of glass in different sites of the Peloponnese. So that means that this glass, this volcanic glass here, you see an example of it, was transferred by boats from Milos or maybe from Crete to other areas, other sites of the Aegean, which is a proof, a direct proof for the trade and for the ability of ancient people to cross even the Aegean. Until then, we can only presume by routes I showed you and by other phenomena that people were able to cross and interconnect both in the Aegean and at a larger scale. So this product of volcanic glass, which can be still found in Akrotiri, in the island of Milos, is very important as an example of proof of ancient trade. Another important proof is well known. These are the frescoes of Akrotiri, Thera, Santorini, which are amongst the oldest and most beautiful frescoes found excavated by Marinatos, and showing that not only the Greeks sailed, but they were able to document and draw their sailings and also their approach to coast. So I put also the woman there because whoever goes to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens will go also to the rooms of Thera and see, amongst other, those shipping scenes, actually Minoan shipping, about almost 4,000 years old, very old. Another short example of the island of Ithaca, with which I will finish my presentation by photo, is a small cave where tripods were found, tripods and those metal pieces in a small village below a small village of Stavros. It's called the Loisos case. It was analyzed by my colleague Irad Malkin, who wrote about a book. I will show the title of the book at the end of my presentation, The Returns of Odysseus. What he tried to prove is, first of all, we it was found here that those metal, you don't see it tripled, but you see pieces of metal were dated 8th century BC, which can prove that the story of Homeros and the Odyssey is true, is authentic, against the views that it is a legend unproven. There are still two parties, one claiming that the Odyssey is a real story or based on real facts, and the other saying it is a myth. So we stay, of course, with this discussion later, but to show you how archaeologists and materialist researchers can contribute to interconnection or to trade and to exchange of products along the in the Mediterranean. And I go to the sphere of religion. So religion, of course, and cult and worship are very important in all cultures, and they are very important in the Greco-Roman world and then in the monotheist world, where still sites and places of worships are the focal point of pilgrimage, of worship, and sometimes of conflicts, as you know well. Delphi is such an important example that I don't even have to present it, but remember that Delphi was considered not only the site of the temple of Apollo, one of the main heroes of Greek mythology, but it was considered the center of the earth, of the oikumene. So first of all, the remains of the 6 pillars of the temple of Apollo, and what we call the omphalos. I don't know if you use it in modern Greek, the navel. That means the Greeks believed, later the Romans said the same about Rome, that Zeus sent 2 eagles from the extremities of the world, of the cosmos, and they met in Delphi. So Delphi was a destiny to become a center of worship, exactly like Mecca is for the Muslims, in a different respect, and Jerusalem for all 3 religions. So Delphi and also Rome and sometimes Alexandria were considered the center of the cosmos, and Delphi lies in the mountains, but without a relation and pilgrimage and sacrifices brought all uphill, it could not exist and become so influential. So sometimes places distant from the sea remind us that the Mediterranean is some entity with a bigger sphere and not only the sea itself. Another center of worship, very important, well known for tourists, is the theater of Epidaurus, maybe the most complete theater of the Greek world, still visited and still plays are shown there. But the interesting point of Epidaurus is not only the idea and fantastic architecture of building a theater with all its dimensions. Those theaters were spread along all the Hellenic world. Then the Romans took over, made an amphitheater and stadium and stadia. But Epidaurus, as I wrote here in the title, was not only a place for shows. Some people, Greeks, came and stayed for some days. A sort of hotel was found there, rooms for visitors, but it was also a therapy place. You could be treated medically for your soul and corpse at the center of Epidaurus, and it is known from other places in the Greek world that where theater shows were shown, it was considered, as Aristotle said, as a therapy. So maybe traveling across the Mediterranean and visiting worship centers is a therapy in itself, especially if you can be treated by medical equipment. So you can see here site locations of I will simply of obsidian. This was the word I was looking for. Obsidian was what I showed you, and again you can see here I jumped and it was separated that obsidian can be studied as one of the ancient products. You can also study many other economic products of trade in order to show how far they went, where the ships went, where products went, where people went, and this is the basis of what we call interconnectivity or the economic sphere I'm speaking about. now to a series of maps showing the navigation or the seafaring. So this by the scholar Paul Arnaud, he showed that during the later period, it began with the Greeks, but continued with the Romans, and we will see soon medieval maps. There were many routes, like we saw many winds. So there were so many ships and there's so many needs, both economic or cultural or religious ones, to cross the sea, that quickly enough or along the centuries, many routes were created, and the map of the Mediterranean is subdivided into many, many trajects that show us. They, of course, are imaginary because we cannot find boats anywhere, but we have literary texts, we have archaeology, we have obsidian, we have other products that can prove, at least indirectly, the connections around the Mediterranean. And this is Rome. Of course, you cannot speak about the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum, without speaking of the Roman Empire. Why? Because the Romans made the switch. They were a continental nation. They excelled in building, in paving roads, the via, and making arches, but they, at a certain time, at a certain moment, when they were fighting against the Carthaginians over here in Tunisia nowadays, the province of Africa, they had to turn into a maritime mode, and they built ships with the Greek tradition and managed, of course, not without losses, to actually conquer again 3 wars against the Carthaginians in the 3rd and 2nd century BC. And this allowed them later on to conquer the other provinces, which you see in culture in different colors, and create an empire around the Mediterranean. And this empire was a constant source of inspiration for later empires. What the Romans did in a very organized way by conquering and creating an Imperium Romanum was later on, of course, imitated even by the Germans, the French, and other empires. What the Romans could do 2,000 years ago could be done in modern times with this. And you see here the name Mare Internum on this map. This is the inner sea. So the Roman Empire cannot be understood without controlling the Mediterranean. And they also subdivided. They transferred their perception of subdividing territory into subdividing the sea. And like the Greeks called the winds in many ways, the Romans called the territory by the names of the main city there, and they divided it in a quite, I would say, modern way, the space of the Mediterranean into subdivisions, which is, of course, a military, political, dominating approach, very typical of Roman civilization. Now, just a few more, I'm getting close to the last part of my lecture. A few examples, or one example close to my heart, is the King Herod. There were many journeys. I will show Herod, and then I will show Paulus, which is in a way even more significant. Herod made a few trips by sea. It is not so well known. He was the most maritime king of the Jews in the Roman period. He founded, with the aid of Augustus, the city of Caesarea Maritima, but he sailed to Rome. So you can see in the green and red lines that he sailed once from Ptolemais, Acco, and once from Caesarea, and crossed either by Alexandria and then to Asia Minor, to Rhodes, to Crete. This was a typical journey between the Levant, the east, and the west. And he went back, and he arrived by chariot to Rome. So this is the journey of Herod just before he got the title of king in 4039 BC. And these are the Roman products going around. So I'm a bit showing it in different versions, but the same idea is that there is a lot of lines, seen or unseen, of connectivity from ancient times, which are the basis for a modern model of interconnectivity in the modern Mediterranean. So these are trade lines. Of course, one can develop it much more. And here I want to really speak just a few words about the journeys of Paulus. I studied it and gave lectures about Paulus and his missionary travel. He had 4 travels. And actually, one could consider Paulus as a very interesting guy with a 4-folded identity. He was a Jew called Shaul. He became a Roman citizen. He had a Greek culture, and he became one of the most important Christian fathers of Christianity. In a way, he was the one, by his travels at sea, who propagated Christianity. So we have here the religious perspective or sphere, which I defined at the beginning of my lecture, transporting ideas, even preaching, mission, done a lot by Christians also in other parts of the world, and he did it by navigating, using the ships that were going along these routes and going to Christian, pagan, and Jewish communities that lived in all those areas of Greece, Asia Minor, and he went to Athens, he went to Thessaloniki, and on his last journey towards the year 60 CE, he went to Rome. That was his last journey, which started in Caesarea. So a lot can be said, but Paulus or Paul is a very important figure by the way of propagating the Christian ideas throughout the Mediterranean. And it is shown by text in the book of Acts, chapter 27. So you can find many iconographic proofs of the importance of Paulus, and especially on the island of Malta, which was one of his adventures, and I will show it here. So he went via Malta, where the ship drowned, and he went to Rome. So you can see it in a schematic way. He went from Caesarea, from the Levant, past the city of Myra, an important harbor of Lycia in Asia Minor, went to Crete, where he met a storm, went to Malta, where the ship was drowned and saved it, and then went via the southern Rhegium to Rome. So this is the physical, geographical, but also intercultural journey of Paulus, who lived between cultures, and he was himself, yes, had 4 different spheres of culture in his own personality. Well, I'm coming close to the end of my presentation, and I would say medieval maps and journeys simply developed the routes and ways of navigation and exchange in the early Mediterranean. So this is how the Genovese routes, Genoa and Venice and Amalfi and other cities, but mostly Genova and Venice until today, they are sort of competitors. They founded a real maritime empire. They had better ships, they had better possibilities of crossing, but they founded colonies exactly as the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Roman founded colonies, which are the basis for the urbanization of the Mediterranean, its cities, and Europe itself. So those routes continued and can be analyzed each one as a phase of interconnectivity in the Mediterranean. Same for the Crusaders. Yes, I should put the Crusaders a bit before. The Crusaders are again a continental culture in its origin, but they crossed the sea from Europe, southern Europe, and made many actually seafaring journeys towards the Holy Land, where they came and occupied it for 2,000 years, and they founded many castles and fortifications, but they had also 3 important maritime centers in Acco, Ptolemais, in Caesarea, and in Atlit, the last castle. So the Crusaders and their ships are another chapter of interconnectivity from, as I wrote here, religious, military, and cultural contexts. So this is Genova, which I showed in a map before. So again, the extent of the Genovese empire is a chapter to study how this maritime city, an important one, created its fleet and crossed the Mediterranean, competed with others, and went from west to east and controlled for many sites and fortified and built towers. Even in Istanbul, there is one Genovese tower. Towards the end, I decided not to bring you the big maps of modern navigations, but you can see nowadays that that the ships, even the container ships, which still cross the Mediterranean or over the Mediterranean for containers, is nothing. It's a real pool, a small closed sea, as we said. But they still, even ferry ships are still very active in the Mediterranean. The amount of shipping in the modern Mediterranean is amazing for such a small sea. Or it was a big sea in antiquity, we saw, but it is a small sea when you compare it to the ocean. So modern shipping is another model with different technology, with different trades and cargoes, but it's the same idea of connecting continents, maybe at a larger scale. And this is the modern Mediterranean before I end with my conclusions. So you can see a very simple geographic map, as we saw at the beginning. And I enumerated 24 countries to be a maximalist, because I included also Monaco and even North Cyprus, because let's say the evidence of countries. And you can see that the political Mediterranean, or the modern national Mediterranean by nationalities, is 23 or 24 countries, half of which is Europe. And there the identity, the modern identity of the Mediterranean is being the south and poorer part of Europe, vis-a-vis Germany and France, who founded the European Union. And then, of course, the Western Asia, of which Israel is part, and the 5 North African countries, which are also Mediterranean in a different way. And they are still sometimes neglected, because our point of view, not only as Orientalists, is looking from the Europe to Africa, but we should look the other way. In sea, we learn to look from the sea to the continent. So the last slides and the citation I will give you is books. There are many books, of course, dozens and hundreds and thousands of publications, but I cited here big works. I started with the Odyssey as a model, and you can see here many books by scholars who devoted their life to write about the Great Sea. You see the Encircled Sea, the Mediterranean world, the Mediterranean society. You can find any point of view in a global way and in an analysis way, Rethinking the Mediterranean by Harris, or The Corrupting Sea, which is a very interesting big 2-volume work from the year 2000. And I chose to cite Brodel. So I will say a few sentences in French and then end with a citation from Matkiewicz, which is here the last title, A Cultural Landscape. So Brodel, one of the most famous scholars who devoted his work to the Mediterranean and to the idea of longue durée, that means phenomena in history that are of long distance, of long period. So I will say a few sentences in French, and if you want, I'll translate it. I'm reading it. La mer, il faut essayer de l'imaginer, de la voir avec le regard d'un homme de jadis, comme une limite, une barrière étendue jusqu'à l'horizon, comme une immensité obsédante, omniprésente. That means the sea, you should try to imagine it with the look of the people of the past. It is a limit, it is a barrier, and just until the horizon, it is an immensity and an omnipresent. So, and he says later that it was considered a big sea, as I showed you from the Bible onwards, the big sea for ages, but now those distances have been shortened. And he says, parler de la Méditerranée et de l'histoire, c'est donc premier soin, souci constant, lui rendre ses vraies dimensions, l'imaginer dans un vêtement de mesure. À elle seule, elle était jadis un univers. That means, speaking of the Mediterranean in history, or as I did in this lecture, is to give it another dimension. Because the Mediterranean alone was once and still is a universe and a planet. And the same is done, and here I finish because I'm a bit beyond my time. Another perception of Frederick Matejevich, who tried to make something less scholarly and more impressionist, more speaking about people and not only of ships and routes. The frontiers of the Mediterranean, it's translated from the Serbian and into Hebrew, and then I made an English version. The frontiers of the Mediterranean are not carved in space or in time. We ignore, sorry for the mistake, how to define them and on what basis, as these frontiers are not historical or ethnical, national or political. They are a circle of line that is constantly painted and erased. The Mediterranean refuses to be reduced in dimension. When one observes it from a Central European point of view, and one sees in it a Latin creation, or when it is examined from a pan-Hellenistic, pan-Arab or Zionist angle, these who evaluate the Mediterranean by its ethnic, religious, or political singularity deny it. That means the Mediterranean again is an entity and a whole, an intercultural, a very colorful, and our possibility by technology, satellites, modern ships to reduce it will not manage to reduce because it is a big thing. And here I end. And here I end with this photo from a village in Ithaca showing a typical scene of the Mediterranean, both the village and the sea with its color and the greenery. And I wish you, as I write here, have a safe sailing and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for this very. Let me. Someone has left. Please stop sharing your screen. Nadav, please stop
Yes,
sharing.
I will stop sharing just a minute. Yes.
Okay, so let's mute, someone that forgot his microphone. Thank you very much. I think it was a very nice presentation from a lot of perspectives. First of all, it's very much linked with our project because our project is named Impact and it names Inter-Mediterranean Peace and Collaboration. And through your presentation, that I think that it will be the opening in the website of our project, you spoke about Inter-Mediterranean and collaboration. I will come to peace later on with my questions, but thank you very much. First of all, it's like it was a very nice presentation, and I was very much impressed with the new knowledge that you provided to us, even that we live in Mediterranean and in Crete, particular. Second, I would like also to thank you because you brought here Greeks, Cretan, and people from Genova, because the people in Genova, they defended Constantinople or Istanbul very bravely. And it was the only ones that they escaped from the Ottomans from the slaughtering. And it was like also, how can I say, in the manuals, they described how strategically they escaped through the conquer of the island. So here you brought, I can see myself in dual positions as a Cretan, as a Greek, and I can see the president that comes, from Genova, and you presented very nice from this area where the Phoenix and Israel it is. So thank you. I have a couple of questions. I don't know. I can see a question from Veret, and Veret, do you want me to read it? How the maps are?
I just wanted to ask Nadav if we can use these maps today. How close are they to what we know today? Were the Greek good researchers? How they can predict the wind? I mean, they have the characteristics, as you said, but can you use it to predict what's going to happen and according to what?
You refer to winds and possibilities of navigation.
Yes, the maps of the winds, yeah.
What the Greeks did, and it's well known for all who study sciences, physics, they observed. What Aristotle and his school did was go to nature and observe, measure the wind, see from where it comes. That's how science begins, even simple science. And this is how they defined the winds. They also tried, sometimes trial and error, to sail. They needed to sail. And they sailed everywhere. And then they documented. For instance, they did what is called in Greek periplos. which
Exactly.
means sailing
Very close.
around and measuring the land, how close it is. But you fail a lot. Ships drowned, and they didn't arrive at their destination. But they accumulated knowledge and experience, and then they drew the maps. The maps were not as exact as they can be nowadays, but they were quite important for the possibility of navigating at first along the shores and to islands as stops, avoiding, as we see in the Odyssey, you wait. When you see a storm, they know that the storm will last a day or a few hours or 3 days. You stop, you wait, you take provisions, and you continue. And then they managed to cross, maybe the Phoenicians also, with many losses, to cross the high sea. So this is what they founded, and later on it was taken by modern fleets who developed, of course, the vapor and didn't navigate only by voile. It is quite a problem how they managed to navigate against the wind. We tried with our students to show them how difficult it is when you don't have a motor on your ship to sail. But the proof is, I showed you the obsidian and other products that they managed to cross through a few thousand years ago already. And then they improved and improved their possibilities and their ships and managed to cross. So this is the Greeks or the Phoenicians and their successors.
And also, I would like to add on this, Nadav, based on your question, that this is the first example of machine learning, how, the people, they learn from trying and fail and try and fail, and they identify and they map, what are the safe routing. And you mentioned through your maps 3 main routing that still, the ships are following in the modern times.
Yes.
So
yes.
the machine learning was introduced from ancient Greeks. I don't
exactly.
know the
Routes, contrary to today, were defined by the geographical possibilities, the land, the rocks, of course, which could break the ships, and the winds. And that's how you accumulate and you draw mapping. And mapping developed much later, but it started from antiquity.
Exactly, yes. Exactly. Any other question? I have seen some, there are some questions. Let me read. I think this is from Samira. Your presentation highlights the significance of maps and navigation. It probes the question, how can individuals contribute to the interconnectedness of the modern Mediterranean?
Yes. It is a question or a remark?
It has a tail question at the end.
Look,
a question
see
mark.
Both, Nadav.
Yes, Samia.
Both.
Yeah, both. I said both.
Okay.
Okay.
I can only say, you see, I by the citation I gave you and the big book by Brodel, look what a book I have in 2 volumes. He studied France at a certain period and made a big study of the Mediterranean, and that was 50 years ago, and many others. But it's quite flexible, the definition of what it is to be a Mediterranean, if we are looking at the personal point of view. I could speak about cultures and movements and routes and exchange, but how do we feel, those who live near the Mediterranean, really as a Mediterranean? Of course, there are many formulas which originate from your ethnical origin and from your neighbors and close society, from your climate and landscape. But there is some sort of evasive conception of what it is to be a Mediterranean, maybe making it as a difference from being a European or a Northern beyond the Alps, or a member of another continent and not one living by the sea. But still the sea, to my knowledge, remains a direct and indirect component of any identity. It doesn't have to be ancient shipping, but it's still, first of all, it fixes our climate. A long summer, a big siesta, and all other phenomena that are quite common from all sides of the Mediterranean. But it is nowadays, to be a Mediterranean is a cultural option, but it was not created. The Mediterranean maybe is so split and divided, 24 countries, 3 continents, that it does not give a reply to the European Union. part of the Mediterranean countries are part of the European Union. There is hardly any, beyond research and other area and small areas, there is no union of Mediterranean countries. One is for environment. There is a charter of Barcelona from 76 already that defined that all countries should share the care for protecting the maritime environment, which is a very important task. One can unite beyond religion and culture to defend nature, environment, the sea itself, which is polluted, and there are other things along which the Mediterranean cultures could make a deal. But the environment is a good example. So that gives us another facet of identity being a Mediterranean today.
Thank you, Nadav. Very strong. I will keep it for our alliance. We are the only Mediterranean.
I want to add another word, another term. I use terminology. We speak about network. We are now united by the Zoom, which is our modern way of communication. The word network, like the word navigation, comes from the sea. Many terms and words from the maritime world were borrowed by aviation, for instance, by computers, and even the word net, which is for fishermen, we forget, became network. Nowadays, we are all wasting or enjoying our time on nets, but we don't go fishing, only some of us anymore. So network is just a sort of paraphrase for a maritime word, very Mediterranean, which became a notion for our technological life.
Excellent, excellent. Keep talking.
No, it's I just wanted to use, maybe there are still more remarks or questions from participants.
Our colleague from Albania, Joanna Tatsi. Joanna, do you want to read it or do you want me to read it? This means what?
Yeah, this means as you wish. I can read it. So
I would like to give you the floor then.
yeah, thank you. Why has the wind-related terminology dwindled to the ones we have today? Does it mean that some windy phenomena have disappeared with the passing of time?
Sorry, I didn't. Can you repeat your question? I didn't.
Okay.
Hear it, so
Why has the wind-related terminology dwindled to the ones we have today? Does it mean that some windy phenomena have disappeared? Related to the wind map you presented at the very beginning that was drafted by Greeks.
Yes.
Ancient Greeks, yeah.
So on the whole, I'm not a geographer myself, but I use geography, and I speak to navigators who sail with yachts, and even with motors nowadays, you still know what the importance of wind. On the whole, for instance, look at the Sirocco. There are many names for this. The eastern wind that comes from the south or from the east, Khamsin in Hebrew and Arabic, Sirocco and others are still winds well known on a local, on a larger basis. When an eastern wind comes in Israel, you are not allowed to go to the sea because the wind will push the small boat to the high seas and it can be lost. We have a chapter in the Bible describing such a drowning of a Tyrian sea from Tyre in Lebanon. And the same with Boreas. In many languages, even in Serbian languages, Boreas, I don't know, maybe in your Albanian language, this is the northern wind, which is cold and destructive. And there is in Greece the word Meltemi. Meltemi is a northern wind that can push, and it's based on ancient winds, can push the boats of the Greeks to the south and crash them. So a fisherman or seaman with a small boat will not go when he knows nowadays by provisions. Yes, we have modern and very sophisticated provisions. We can know the main weather for at least 72 hours. Those are the models, very complicated computer. So when he knows a Meltemi or a Boreas or a Sirocco is coming, he will avoid going into the open sea. So the main winds are there. Some of them disappeared because they were defined by not scientific enough phenomena, but the main trends are there. For instance, the western wind. The western wind. The western harbor of Alexandria was called the pleasant harbor of return, because you could return safely into this western part of Alexandria, a very important city, by simply using the backwind.
Thank you. Joanna, are you satisfied?
Partly.
We have another message. I had a question. Yes, please. Moheb, please go ahead. Switch on your microphone and ask your question. Where's Moheb? If I pronounce, I'm sorry, Omri. It's easier for me to call you Omri.
Yeah, it's my name. I had a question. It's in the chat, and you can read it as well.
Please do it.
Yeah,
I
the
didn't
question
manage to
is,
read all the, yes.
yeah, yeah, is the connection with the Red Sea nowadays enrich and shaping the modern Mediterranean? Because in the old maps that you showed, it was not connected with the Red Sea, and now it's connected.
Yes.
It was, I mean, the shaping and the transformation, it was only inside like a loop with the Mediterranean, and then it comes from the Morocco, I guess, and then they can cross to the ocean. Now they are
Yes.
connected with the Red Sea. How does that will influence? And
Yes, so the Red Sea was of course separated because there was no Suez Canal, and not even the Corinth Canal, which was built at the end of the 19th century. But the Red Sea is well known both from the Bible and ancient texts. It was, by the way, called in Greco-Roman times the Erythraean Sea. And there is a periplos of the Erythraean Sea showing that ships were going there from ancient times, and there are archaeological remains going to the east. And there is also a perception that maybe the Phoenicians or Greeks managed to circumnavigate around Africa, not only the Portuguese in the modern times, but they managed to do it against by trial and error. They managed to go around Africa, which is a big challenge with a long seafaring. But the Red Sea was well known, at least to those who lived in East Africa and in Eilat and in Saudi Arabia and those countries. This was the way to go to the further east, to India and to the other provinces. So it's well known, but it was disconnected from the Mediterranean because you had to pass in Egypt a continental barrier until the Suez Canal, which means a lot, was carved and dug. Yes. So I don't know if I answered all your question, but the Red Sea is a phenomenon well known. The Red Sea and then the Persian Gulf, of course. You see, the Persian Gulf is called by Persia, which is the main entity, ancient and modern, that was touching and interested in this sea. And India also.
Omri, you are.
how it will influence in 1,000 years from now, if we will speak after 1,000 years about the history, how it will change in your mind?
Oh, you want me to be not only an historian, but a prophet?
Omri is very ambitious.
1,000 years is not enough. Ask geologists. They will tell you in 10,000 years that Africa is coming close to Europe. Did you know that? There's a movement of plates, a slow and sure movement of plate. It will take some tens of thousands of years, and Africa will join, which means that at some time, but it will be after our life, in about a few dozens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands, Africa will join the Mediterranean, and Europe and the Mediterranean will be reduced as it was before. You know, the Mediterranean was before created by geological forces, and geologists believe that there were two basins. The strait near Sicily and Tunisia was once a bridge, and the Mediterranean was two basins, and then it was broken open, and also the Strait of Gibraltar. You know, the Greeks attributed to Hercules, the myth of opening the Strait of Gibraltar, and there are the pillars of Hercules in North Africa and in the edge of Gibraltar, showing that it was a human being or a mythological figure, Hercules, who separated the pillars of Hercules and created the only opening to the Mediterranean, because without Gibraltar and the connection to the Atlantic, the Mediterranean could risk of drying up. The sun, and the saltiness of the Mediterranean is the poorness of its elements are not as rich as the Atlantic. For instance, fishing is in a big crisis, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean. In Greece, Israel, Morocco is a bit better because they have more fish and tuna, etc. So fishing is one of the oldest professions living of the sea. There is fishing and there is shipping, building ships and crossing the water.
Thank you.
So I went away from what will happen in 1,000 years. In 1,000 years, many political things will happen, but the geography, maybe of course the heat, the planet is heating and we will have more summer, more heat and less water, but it will still, if I can predict, it will still remain the same lines. Let's fix a meeting in 1,000 years.
Omri, are you going to be there? Thank you. This is actually, in Crete, we experience this. Since the island of Crete experiences an inclination per year because of the approach of the African, let's say, continent towards,
Yes.
Europe. And that's why we have a lot of earthquakes as well in the east, in the southeast Mediterranean, and especially in Greece.
Yes.
So I have a question. I have 3 questions, but I will make one. So many characteristics, so many civilizations, so many science has been generated through this area, but at the same time, so many distractions, so many wars, so why does this happen? This is the multiculturalism, because looking your maps, this is what I thought. I have never seen in my life any area that contains so many different cultures, so many different religions, and so much competition. So what is the role, and how can we resolve this? The universities, what we can do in order, to exploit and leverage only the science and the knowledge and the innovation, because it's always an innovation over there,
Yes.
and avoid all the conflicts. What we should do?
Yes. Okay. Of course, this is already in the sphere of political science, diplomacy, and relations between people. But I can say, first of all, we can create many meetings.
Nadav, let me tell you, C is like the main tool of science diplomacy.
Yeah, yes. But make more projects like Erasmus and more meetings with Zoom. You see, now we have a representation of 4 or 5 nations here in this small group, or more even. And in your group, you have even more. And Europe has more. That's one thing. Speak, meet. It sounds banal, but it's a clue. Now about the multicultural and its negative or its destructive approach. Of course, where different cultures and special religions live, you have an excuse or a motivation for conflict. Because if one religion says, I don't point to one specific, I have the truth, and the others are not good or even traitors, then a conflict starts and a war starts.
But
Look at history, how many
Nadav,
wars started with religion or nationality? Yes.
But Nadav, this is a contradiction, because at the same time, too much science and too much innovation has happened. And this is a contradiction to the people that they say, I am the truth. Who is the truth? No one is truth. Everyone has the truth.
The two powers work parallelly. The reality is dialectic. I'm not a Marxist, but there are positive and negative forces working in our life and also in the Mediterranean. And when it comes to cultures, I must point at one thing. Maybe this is the message that people, especially politicians and heads of state, don't point. Xenophobia. That means we look at the other not only as an other, but something that is sometimes worse, less pejorative, and sometimes religions and cultures contribute to it. Instead of taking the other as exactly our equal. I think most of civilizations have an implanted, built-in, let's say, hesitant or negative approach to the other. The word xenophobia comes from Greek. Xenos is the stranger, and
Yes.
phobia is very interesting.
Phobos.
Phobia is both fear and hatred. Ask
Ah.
psychologists why fear and hatred are related in the same word, phobia.
Thank you.
But we should work for philoxenia. We should
Exactly.
work for hosting, hospitality. It's very typical of Mediterranean, especially, for instance, Arab groups, Bedouins, also some of the Jews and other people do practice hospitality. That means accepting the neighbor not only for a coffee is a symbol, but creating, first of all, personal relations, and then it can enlarge. But maybe I'm over-optimistic because wars and conflicts follow humanity as much as science and creations. Both forces work, and the best is to try to limit the negative ones, which are very powerful, and put ourselves on a common relationship as human beings. It sounds almost legendary, but it can be done from the individual to the group, from academic to politics to economics to everything.
Thank you, Nadav. Very clear, and I totally agree with you. That's why we would like to invite you to another initiative about these talks about peace that we start with Ukraine. Probably you are the person to discuss with us how sea and the Mediterranean and this multicultural can work in the opposite way, into philoxenia and not xenophobia. So
Yes.
I'm going to send you an invitation in order to participate in this.
Okay, we will speak about it, yes.
No, we're not going to speak. You know, in Greece, we are not so democratic. We decide.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it was really nice and very different, and this is the nice thing. And I think
Yes.
that communication, either and internationalization of the universities and our studies and our campuses, they boost the communication and the understanding without, you know, placing any mottos and any, let's say, fanatic things that, you know, like they work like this and we work like that. I mean, these are stupid things, and I think it's outside of the university. The universities, you know, they need to cultivate the opposite mindset. So Nadav, thank you very much. Thank all
Thank
of
you
that were with
for
us.
inviting, and
We are going to invite you again now.
I'm in trouble now, yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
and,
everybody, for listening to me and
Thank you so much.
participating.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Have a nice
All the
evening.
best to you, Costa, and to everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Καληνύχτα.
Καληνύχτα, γεια σας.